Acts 7:23 through 25. One day as he was nearing the 40th birthday, this is referring to Moses. And this is general knowledge and history of what happened. So all the Pharisees, all the people Stephen's speaking to know this and accept this part. This part, it ain't till later in his message that they have a problem with it when he mentions Jesus. But all this they accept, they agree with, because it's according to the Old Testament, which they followed. It came into his mind to visit his brothers. So we see how Moses knew he was an Israelite. He grew up as an Egyptian, brought into Egyptian, taught their ways, taught their culture, probably their worships. But it came on his heart. He knew God let him know who he was and who he was. The people of Israel. During this visit, he saw an Egyptian mistreating a man of Israel. So Moses killed the Egyptian. So we see how God puts it on his heart, but how he reacts in his own way. God wouldn't have had him do this. God's plan was for him to lead them out later. God's plan wasn't to use Moses yet. Sometimes we can take a rash and have so much compassion that we misact and act without God's guidance. And that's what Moses did here. He was rash because of his passion towards his people. And instead of waiting for God to call him, he just reacted. Oftentimes, this helps. We see later after this how he went out in the wilderness. Part of this was because he did this. Main reason. When we do this, we don't end up going out in the wilderness, but oftentimes when we step on and do things that before God leads us to them, we end up in various problems. We get tired and worn down because it's something that he hasn't led us to. And when he's not there to uplift us to do it. We're working on our own, and so we don't got the Spirit strengthening us and reviving us to do what he's called us to do. When he calls us to do what he's called us to do, we may get tired and worn down, but he'll revive us to serve further. But it's very easy to break down doors out of compassion for things we want to do and make opportunities. But ultimately, when we're doing that, we're not being submissive to the Lord's will. We're not waiting. We're not showing patience. God had a plan for Moses. And God's plan would still happen, but Moses was kind of rushing things. He was trying to use his power to get things done when God wanted to use his power to get things done. And later God would use his power to get things done, because when Moses came back, he was no longer in royalty. He was just a shepherd. Of course, they probably knew who he was, but he was in a position of power. If Moses would have did things now, it would have been in his influence because of the power the Egyptians gave him. And sometimes God's timing's that. That way he gets more glory and we get less. And that's the way it needs to be. If Moses would have been able to bring out the people of Israel at this point, Moses would have got more credit and God would have been just secondary. But the way God did it, Moses was secondary and God was on the main focus, as it should have been. It goes the same way. When we break down doors, we're the main focus instead of God. But when we wait on him, he's the focus and we're just the person he's using. Verse 25, Moses supposed his brothers would realize that God had sent him to help them, but they didn't. So he did this out of good intentions. He was trying to rile up the people. The fact is, at this point in time, the people were so divided against themselves that they could not be united to go against Egypt. There was no Israel. It was just groups of people at this point. There was still the nation, they were still descendants of Israel. They just weren't collectively done. We see this division even when Moses led them into the wilderness. But for him to lead them into the wilderness, be led into the wilderness, there was more collectiveness than there was at this point. There was pretty much no collectiveness at this point. It's perhaps that even tribes were divided against themselves from heads of families to heads of families. We see when the groups are divided, it's so easy for them, once they're in the wilderness, to go that way, which shows that there was a big, strong division. And as strong a leader as Moses could have been, he wouldn't have been strong enough to unite the people. The people needed to be united under something stronger, under the Lord. And the Lord united the people and then led them out. Now, the division would creep in, but the Lord handled it. Moses wasn't the one that was called to unite the people. The Lord was. And he did that through the same way he brought down the Egyptians, through the plagues, showing his power. He didn't just show his power to Egyptians, he showed it to Israel at the same time.